All right, everybody, welcome to another special edition of the Due Dissidents podcast. We're earning our money this week. Keaton Weiss with Russell Dobular and Anish Shivani here. Thank you, gentlemen. Yeah, absolutely.
Good to be back again.
Absolutely, yeah. You were back just about an hour ago, or in our viewers' experience, about a day ago. My voice is already starting to give out. I can feel it. So let's get right down to business here. This is our week of midterm coverage. We previewed some governor's races. We previewed some House races yesterday. Today we're previewing the Senate races. Now, this is kind of fascinating because the Senate, for many, many months, has been considered in pretty safe Democratic hands, even in a red wave year. So in 2018, the Democrats did very well in the House, but they actually lost seats in the Senate because the Senate map, the states that were in play, still favored the GOP. In 2016, where the map favored Democrats did not hold the Senate in 2016 because Democrats imploded in 2016, but that Senate map was still considered favorable to the Democrats. 2022, because it's 6 years later, is the same Senate map as 2016. So this favored Democrats all along. And all throughout the summer, it seemed very likely that Democrats would retain the Senate, despite Republicans poised to do very well in the House. So here is the map of the 538 Senate forecast. You see Republicans doing well, and then over the summer, look, this long elliptical shape here, where Democrats were favored throughout the summer, but then look, it came back to the Republicans. The arc of justice is long, but it sways towards MAGA. Yeah.
That was an early draft.
Right, yeah, exactly. It's not sways. What is it? The arc of justice is long, but
Bends.
bends. What did I say? Sways. Bends towards justice.
Everyone knew what you meant, Keith.
They knew what I meant, but I botched the exact wording. So Russell is the resident impressionist, and I'm not. Russ is more precise in his impressions than I am.
Sarah Palin used to talk about bending, right?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
We bend over or whatever.
Yeah. That was in her previous career more so than this.
That was in her previous incarnation as a cam girl.
Yeah.
Right. Those were the beauty pageant days. Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
So
the proto cam girl.
So the extremes now, they're talking about possibly 53, 54 Republicans. And even a couple of weeks ago, it used to be more like, well, maybe they can be 51. The Republicans, but now, if it really is as much of a red wave, and it all depends also on the poll undercounting of Republicans, which has been a tendency in the last few cycles. If all of that pans out, then they are really hopeful that it could be Nevada and Georgia and Pennsylvania and possibly even Arizona. So 53, 54 is their dream, and the Democrats would just like to hold on to 50, which was likely not very long ago. And actually, for most of the year, people weren't thinking about the Senate going away. So that would be huge if they lose the House, which is very likely, plus the Senate. That would be enormous for the next couple of years, right?
Of course. So what happened here is that the Republicans expanded the map.
Right.
As of about a month ago, the Republicans needed an inside straight to win because they had to hold states like Wisconsin, states like Ohio, states like even like North Carolina, which were looking a little bit dicey. They had to hold all those. And then on top of that, they had to win 2 out of the 3 states of Pennsylvania, Georgia, and Nevada. At that point in the conversation, Arizona wasn't even a factor. They were just kind of assuming that they were going to lose Arizona. All of that has changed now to the point where the Republicans are very likely to hold the states with incumbent Republicans or retiring Republicans in the case of Ohio. They are now likely to hold all of those. Now, all they need are 2 out of 3, Pennsylvania, Georgia, Nevada. Pennsylvania, the state that was most likely to be a Democrat pickup, is now a toss-up at best. So let's start there.
Well, I don't
because
know.
ultimately,
Oprah, once you get Oprah.
That's right. Oprah just endorsed John Fetterman today.
Betrayed Oz.
Right. She betrayed her old colleague Dr.
Yeah.
Oz. So let's start
between Oz and Dr. Phil. Isn't it time that we can reevaluate Oprah's legacy?
Well, I mean, I don't know
well,
what kind of
some
legacy.
wanted her to run for president in
That's
2020.
right. Yeah, exactly.
Remember, she was going to be president.
Yeah, I love
That's a good
Oprah.
way
He always loved Oprah.
Yeah, that's one way to reevaluate her legacy if she was president.
All right, so let's start in Pennsylvania because the way it all shook out now, the Republicans are likely to hold the red incumbent states. We will get into a few of those races later, but now the race really comes down to the Senate control really comes down to Pennsylvania, Georgia, Nevada. Whichever party wins 2 out of those 3 races is likely to control the Senate. Not certain, because there are some X factors where there didn't used to be, and we'll get into that next. But let's just start with those big 3, and let's start with Pennsylvania, because Pennsylvania really is the race that went from solid Democrat pickup, because Pat Toomey is a Republican. He is retiring. John Fetterman, throughout the vast majority of this cycle, was heavily favored to beat Dr. Oz. Dr. Oz then caught some momentum in the fall as people started tuning in and the race came into focus, where all of a sudden the fact that Oz is from Jersey and the fact that he buys crudité didn't matter as much as the kitchen table issues that come into focus in the closing months of a campaign, because fall is when the mailers go out. Fall is when the debates go, and we know how that debate went between Fetterman and Oz. He's lucky he's still in this thing. Right? I thought it was over the second he opened his mouth on that stage that night. But now we have a real race, a real dead heat race between John Fetterman and Dr. Mehmet Oz. I'm just going to pull up the recent polling here. We look at how that polling has just, look at this. Fetterman, 48-39. This was over the summer. Oz starts closing a little bit, but look at how quickly Oz has closed that gap to the point where now there is a 0.1 spread in Oz's favor, although it is noteworthy that Dr. Oz has led in these previous 3 polls. All 3 of these polls are right-leaning. However, it's worth noting that right-leaning polls have tended to be more accurate than the so-called mainstream polls because of the underpolling of Republicans. So this race is a dead heat. And
it's a statement on what a disgusting little creep Oz is, that after that debate, he's not killing it.
Yeah.
I mean, what a terrible choice for those voters.
This is the thing. The Republicans made some candidate quality mistakes. If the Republicans stuck to the Glenn Youngkin model, the, benign, milquetoast, conservative type, they'd probably be running away with a lot of these races. But despite some poor candidate quality choices, definitely, they are still poised to, according to 538, win the Senate. It's a dead heat. It's anybody's guess. But this Pennsylvania race is a dead heat right now. And that just shows where the momentum is. Because a month ago, this was in the Democrats' column. They weren't even worried about this.
This is a very unique race, though. This is really, I don't think Oz, even with the national momentum, would be anywhere near winning this race if Fetterman had not had a stroke. He wouldn't be in the running.
Oh no, of course.
The fact that it's this close in spite of that debate tells you that.
Yeah,
I'm not sure how much so-called candidate quality matters in the end. I mean, there's this.
But this is an extreme case.
Well, maybe it won't even matter in Georgia, which is the most extreme of extreme cases, right? Let alone Oz is not in the same category as Herschel Walker. But I'm not sure, because I think in the end, people drift toward their parties. It seems that way. It seems to be the case. I'm not sure how much the debate mattered in the end. I personally, when I first saw that debate, I was shocked like you guys. I could not believe that Fetterman hadn't led on, that he was in such poor shape. And it was very shocking to see that the first time. However, I watched the whole thing in a calm frame of mind, and the second time, he didn't seem so bad. And traditionally, debates don't change people's minds that much. And there has been another couple of weeks, so people are like, okay, well, he's got my values, and as far as the Senate being this great deliberative body, these are not like Cicero's and whatever. They're like yeah, just vote one way or the other, and that's what all you need your guy to do, right? I'm also become very sympathetic to Fetterman more than I ever was in the past before the debate, because I relate to him. I'm sympathetic, and I hope that he recovers in the Senate, that his brain heals. I think every organ heals, heart, lung. Why not the brain? I mean, he just needs time. And I had a question for you guys, actually. What if he had actually come out and in the summer, May, June, July, said, you know what, I'm in really bad shape, but this is my prognosis over the next year, 2 years, 3 years. I'm going to make a steady
should have dropped
recovery. Okay, well, but if he had said this is my health condition, do you think that the voters, the country is forgiving enough to have said, okay, that's fine? And, what do you think, Keaton?
Well, I'm not sure if they're forgiving enough, but given how crucial Pennsylvania is to the Democrats' chances of retaining the Senate, that's not a chance you can take. You can't hope that the voters are forgiving enough. If you're not fit to run this race the way it needs to be run, you got to get out, because the road to control of the Senate for Democrats ran through Pennsylvania. It still does. And you took a solid Democrat pickup against an extraordinarily weak Republican candidate, and you turned it into a toss-up with Oz leading in most of the new polling. So if I had to bet, I mean, we're not going to jump the gun on Sunday's show where we're going to make our final predictions, but I'll tease it out. My money is on Oz to win this race right now, given the trajectory of the race, and given the fact that he's led in recent polls, and that is a function of that debate performance. Candidate quality does matter. It's not, see, both things can be true, right? A lousy Republican candidate, or a lousy Democratic candidate for that matter, can win. That doesn't mean that candidate quality was not a factor. I can prove to you that candidate quality is a factor in Georgia when we get to that state next, but I'll bookmark that for now because I want to give Russell a chance to answer your question, and then we'll move on to Georgia.
Going all the way back to the Nixon-Kennedy debates, if you're going to come off like that on TV, you're very unlikely to be able to win. That's it. This is what people saw. They saw somebody who could not speak. They saw somebody who could not formulate their answers. Most people are not political junkies like us. They saw what they saw, and that's it. He's probably going to lose. So what you're talking about, are people forgiving enough? It doesn't even enter into it. People mostly have a passing interest, if that, in these subjects, and they're just going to see that. And listen, I'm making it sound like, well, they should put him in the Senate. As I made very clear, hey, these people in Pennsylvania, that is a problem for them in terms of getting properly represented. A lot of the Senate is, even if they're not Ciceros, you have to listen to speeches, you have to give speeches, and also you need to be wheeling and dealing in the back room. You need to be able to cut deals. You need to be able to wheedle people. If your representative can't do that, and in terms of his prognosis, no one can predict that. It's the brain. It's not like a broken leg. Hopefully, he will make a full recovery. There's nothing personally against him, certainly not wishing any ill on him, but you don't know that. You don't know that, and you don't know how long that might take. So how long are the people of Pennsylvania supposed to be poorly represented because they elected somebody who has a cognitive difficulty that is a serious impairment in the job that they've been elected to do? Now, I'm not saying, and I've made this clear, if I were in Pennsylvania, I'd vote for him anyway, just to keep Oz out of there. But you cannot say, no, this is not a legitimate concern. The voters are just ignorant.
No, of course not. Well, at the very least, we agree that he should have been more transparent. In your case, you believe he should have dropped out. I'm not sure how much that was.
I think the noble thing would have been to fall on his sword. Instead, they clearly shielded him from public view.
Right.
They were very misleading about the extent of his difficulties.
Right.
And then they threw him on a debate stage.
Right.
And everyone's jaw dropped. Not mine. I predicted that was going to happen. I thought the interview with, I always get her name right, Dasha Burns. After that interview, I said, okay, if that's how he performed in a friendly interview, what's that debate going to be like?
Yeah. I mean, I agree with all of that. And I would have thought all those things a couple of weeks ago, but as time has gone by since the debate, I've become more and more sympathetic toward Fetterman, and I hope that people can be forgiving, because I think he's an enormously, sympathetic guy, and he's got generally the right values, although he's constrained by the Democratic Party. So when it comes to fracking or the Ukraine war, I mean, he's got to walk with the party. But in general, he's on the right, ideological spectrum. I also just wanted to say quickly about Oz is that I've become more scared of him as time has gone by. And I think, maybe we'll get into this on Tuesday on election night. But I think when we talk about the post-Trumpist versus the Trump, minus Trump's the positive aspects of Trump's populism, that's some of what I see in a figure like Oz, where he would be he'd easily go along with some of the more extreme, if you want to call them libertarian, right, aspects of their economic philosophy. So I'm beginning to see some of that in Oz more than what I saw in Oz, let's say, in the early part of the year. So he scares me much more than he did some months ago.
All right, let's move on to Georgia, and this is where I'm going to open with my candidate.
You are not going to be going to Dr. Oz for a referral. Is that on the record, Anise?
Oh,
we can safely say that?
Those were great. His medical, his alternative medical, textbooks. Those are fine. The crudités are fine. That's not where the problem is. Yeah, you can go shopping for crudités with him, but he's got other. I mean, I think he'll easily go along with some very extreme things, and he won't have any qualms at all. So
well, a lot of them are like that.
Right.
Most of them.
Yeah, but he's very scary, to me at this point.
All right, let's move on to Georgia. This is where I'm going to make my candidate quality argument right here. So in Georgia, we have Herschel Walker versus the incumbent Democrat Raphael Warnock. And so I just want to put up on the screen here, you can see it very faintly here in the corner. I'm sorry it's not a little clearer, but Georgia, Walker holds an average lead over Warnock of 0.4 points, 0.4. Mm-hmm. In the same race, Brian Kemp is defeating Stacey Abrams by 8.1 points. So you have a Republican governor polling 8 points ahead of his Democratic rival, and you have Herschel Walker trailing 7.5 points behind Brian Kemp. That is a statement about candidate quality. It doesn't mean that Herschel Walker can't win. He may very well win. But there's no doubt that candidate quality...
He may win off Kemp's momentum.
Perhaps, but there's no doubt that candidate quality is hurting the Republicans in that Senate race, because you have a year where Republicans are beating Democrats handily in a governor's race. But what this means is that there's a considerable percentage, not anywhere near a majority, not anywhere near double digits, but there's about 7% of voters are going to split their ticket between Brian Kemp and Raphael Warnock. And if there were a less moronic candidate running for Senate, they'd be running away with that race as well. Now, having said that, Walker is in a very good position to win this race. So it's not that the bad candidates can't win. It's just to say that would they have been better off nominating just an average Joe to run against Warnock? Probably.
Well, Truman said there are only so many abortion scandals you can have before it hurts your numbers. So this is an old principle in politics that he's just violated. It seems like he's never seen an abortion he didn't want to pay for. It's actually come out now that he's paid for other abortions just at random. He's gone by the Planned Parenthood clinic to pay for them. It's an addiction of his.
Well, at least he's paying for them and not the state. At least taxpayer dollars aren't paying for abortions.
As long as it's
paying for his own abortions. He's paying for his own abortions. I don't want my tax dollars paying for Herschel Walker's abortions. Herschel Walker's responsible. He pays for his own abortions.
He's stepping up like a man.
He's stepping up.
Right.
He's doing the right thing. He's not leaving that poor girl in a bad way.
Not stiffing the taxpayers with the bill.
I don't want to pay for that abortion.
Right, that's what they're saying.
I didn't have the fun. I'm not paying for the abortion.
Right. But isn't this an elitist attack on Herschel Walker, that he has these mental difficulties, he's paid for these abortions? Why do I care about that? I mean, that's his personal life. What does that have to do with politics? even his, background or whatever.
Well, because
problem he
he's
might have seen,
running
right?
as an anti-abortion Republican.
Okay, but
That's why
what
it's
about
running.
redemption? In this country, redemption is big, right? He's sorry. He said, "I'm sorry about this. I don't have this associative disorder." I mean, this is, if we are talking about, are we elitists trying to pick candidates who meet certain professional standards of behavior, and like
No,
they
no, of
all
course
have
not.
to be,
Listen, all I'm saying is,
yeah.
I'm just putting on my objective analyst hat here and saying that the Republicans would have been better off picking a less ridiculous nominee
But how do
for
we?
the Senate.
Well, okay, so you gave the Brian Kemp example, right? And then
Right.
there's an example of Oz, and actually this applies to all of them, Vance and Masters and Laxalt, all of them. The liberals would have said, well, the candidate quality is, the Republicans could have, but how do we know that it's me? 6 months ago, these states were not so much in play, but now Pennsylvania is. Is it despite or because of Oz's candidate quality? Is it Herschel Walker standing out as this football star with problems? But you can forgive him. At least he's interesting, right? Maybe
Look,
that, right? So how do we know that it's not? It's very difficult to know that it's, what about Trump? That was the ultimate case of candidate quality being working against you. And look at him. He's, so I'm just saying that.
No, I take your point. I think it's a fair point.
Look,
And
look,
there is no way to know. There is no way to know.
And also, like,
Right.
when
It's political malpractice that they have not once had him say, "I'm going to sack inflation."
Yeah.
right, but here's the thing. Okay, so he speaks. Again, with Fetterman, we were surprised how poorly he did in the debate. With Walker, I'm sure, right? We were like surprised in a different. We were like, oh my God, this guy. Great message, discipline. And at one point, Warnock kept talking about, like, he always talks about heart and emotion. And they asked Warnock, like, hey, are you for the federal minimum wage? Like, no, just shut up. Like, okay, I just feel for these people. And with Walker, like, okay, I think the question was about the Braves, or was it the name change or the Tomahawk or whatever? I don't know.
Right. Yeah.
And he was like, hey, people don't give a fuck about that. I'm interested, like, what about your, money, inflation and all that? People don't care about that. And that was it. And that is not something.
Well, that's a good answer.
He said it in a way that a professional, more polished candidate may not have been able to convey this in a way that. So I'm saying, if you're talking about democracy, is this a democracy? And if it is a democracy, why can't we have people like Oz and Trump? And I mean, this is what the country is.
No, I'm not casting any like moral dispersions on people who vote for them. I'm just saying, like, if you look at the polling, right? Look at I go back to the Virginia governor's race model. They played it safe, down the middle. They side-pocketed Terry McAuliffe, no problem, right? If you look at this year, the same thing. Ron Johnson, boring, milk toast, white bread, seems to be doing very well in his race. Bud, whatever the guy, I forget his first name, in North Carolina. Doing very, very well, no problem. Marco Rubio, no problem, right? The milk toast candidates are having no problem side-pocketing the Democrats because this is a red wave year.
Right.
And so had they picked more milquetoast candidates, they would have had an easier time side-pocketing the Democrats. Now, they could win anyway. And there's no way to prove, obviously, there's no way to prove in retrospect that Walker wasn't a better choice than whoever his challenger was in that race. I don't recall his name, although at one point I did have that. But what I'm seeing in the numbers is that the mainstream Republicans are having an easy time putting away a very unpopular Democratic Party. And the Republicans are struggling in places where they took chances. Now, could those chances pay off anyway? Sure they can. Sure they can. But that doesn't take away from the fact we see it in the numbers, right? The more boring the candidate, the easier time they're having.
Right.
And that's just true across the board.
And I would to emphasize your point, what I've seen a lot of the Senate races, governor's races, House races, like with Caroline Levitt, whom I mentioned in the discussion on the House, they're playing despite extremist views, right? They're all coming across. They finally figured out how to package the Trumpist message, or some case very extreme libertarian message, in a way that sounds cool, which you need a certain level of professional accomplishment or stability to be able to do. So that makes, and they're all doing well, right? They may win, many of these less threatening candidates, right? Who look normal enough to be in the, in
Yeah,
politics.
well, I mean, speaking of less threatening candidates, Russell, do you have anything to add on Georgia before we move on?
I'm calling that one for Walker.
All right. Well, we're going to do predictions tomorrow, but
Yeah.
we previewed your teas there. Speaking of boring candidates, Anis.
Boring candidates. I wonder who you're going to go with next. It's
Well,
not
the next of the
Nevada?
big three. Well, yes, that's the next of the big
Yeah, you're
three.
talking about
Nevada is
Miss
part of the
Kath-
big three. You have a very.
Or whatever her name is. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
No, her Catherine Masto.
Yeah. So in Nevada, which is the third of the big three, right? Once again, Georgia, Pennsylvania, Nevada. Those are the big three to watch on Tuesday. All right. And tune in Tuesday, 6:30 p.m. Eastern. We will be here all night long. In Nevada, you have boring Adam Laxalt with an average polling lead of 1.9 points over incumbent Catherine Cortez Masto. This is a good example of a boring candidate seeming to have a better go of it than the MAGA GOPers. So, Anis, you've done a lot more research on this race than Russell and I combined. So why don't you take the floor for a second?
Well, he's not actually boring. He's an extremist and he's utterly crazy. The love child of Pete Domenici, which I didn't know. I only knew about the Laxalt part of the family, but his mom had an affair with Pete Domenici, a scandal-ridden, I think it was Arizona senator, right?
Well, that is interesting. I take
right,
it back.
so that
It's not
was-
boring.
So is this proven, or is
Yeah,
it
yes,
like?
yes. So they admitted the paternity, I think,
Oh,
just a few years ago in like 2013 or something. Not so they were, this was never known, and apparently many members of his family came out against, I think in the early 2010s, like when he wanted to run for attorney general, Laxalt did, right? Against him being, because they didn't want to sully the Paul Laxalt, who used to be Reagan's close friend. So I knew about Paul Laxalt growing up, right? That was a very well-known figure in Nevada. So now here comes Adam Laxalt as attorney general, and he's as crazy as you can be, filing lawsuits against the Obama administration on all sorts of things that you can imagine. And then, of course, he was very prominent in 2020 with the election and everything, which is why he became Trump's favorite, right? So he is in with the Trump crowd after 2020. So he's an example of a truly extreme candidate who is now packaged. If you watch him now, listen to him, he just sounds, he's just downplaying all his actual extremism. But I think that in Nevada, the problem is just like we were talking about earlier with how the pandemic economic dislocation never got resolved. And if there's any state that was affected by, the lockdown, tourism, that whole collapse. I know people who had left Texas to go to Nevada just before the pandemic. And I was always wondering, my God, now what are they doing now? So that state of all, and then the Harry Reid Democratic machine, Harry Reid is dead now, right? So it's hard to it used to be more of a lockstep union thing where you would just, the Democrat had a pretty good shot. Now what? Now you got this guy making inroads into more traditional Democratic constituencies and playing it as if he's normal. So he's not saying crazy stuff like, some of the other people. He's just playing it like very low key and, he's got a great shot against. And again,
well, look, Anis, let me just cut. I'm sorry. Go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead.
No, as with all these Senate candidates, right, or the governors what can they run on? What can they run? What has Biden given them to run on where they could say, we made your lives better in this way? There's nothing to point out. If they talk about inflation reduction, the other guy comes right back at you and say, you know what? This is actually some climate bullshit. It's not even inflation reduction. And you're just hurting our energy independence. And you're making ultimately the price of, energy higher. So you can just come back after all these half-assed measures and make a mockery of them. So what can they run on except, there's nothing there, right? What are you going to fight him against? And on the other hand, a guy like Adam Laxalt can come out and lay out his whole, libertarian philosophy. It's in a very nice sounding way. So yeah, go ahead. What were you going to?
No, I just want to make perfectly clear to both you and the audience that when I talk about Republicans in terms of scary or crazy versus boring and stuff like that, to me, the scariest Republican is a Bush, Cheney, neocon
Right.
Republican. To me, they're far scarier than the MAGA people. Okay.
Right.
So when I say scary, I'm just
agree.
speaking as someone who's trying to objectively analyze the race, given the current political atmosphere. I'm not talking about myself, what I consider scary. To me, the scariest of all are Liz Cheney. Liz Cheney, to me, is the most frightening Republican in America. But that's not how it's perceived. And so for the purposes of the next few days, I'm just trying to give as objective an analysis as I can for people,
completely.
going into the vote.
I agree with that. And when I said earlier about Oz being scary to me, and I've mentioned that in the earlier show too, is what I see with some of these post-Trumpist candidates is going back to that, and I did explicitly say the early 2000 type of attitude in terms of immigrants and border and so on, which is, that's scary to me. That's scary to me because that's not MAGA, that's not populist, that's really bureaucratic, technocratic, authoritarian in the real sense of the word, which is Liz Cheney and the Cheney family and the Bushes. That's really scary. I'm not scared by these MAGA people when they go.
No, I agree with you.
With their crazy stuff. That I don't find really too scary. And so yeah, and that's where I see someone like Laxalt coming in, where there are different kind of they're in the Trump camp, right? In the broad Trump camp, but I see a lot of a different kind of harsh, brutal quality to them that I don't even see in the MAGA people.
This next category of states are states that looked out of reach for Republicans about a month ago, but now look like they're in play. So these next two states are the Republicans' insurance policy against losing two out of the big three that we just mentioned. And those two states are Arizona and New Hampshire. So we'll take Arizona first. It looked like Kelly, Democratic incumbent, was pretty comfortably ahead of the Peter Thiel MAGA Blake Masters. That does not look to be the case anymore. Masters has tightened those polls significantly in recent days and weeks, although even more so, like I said, in recent days. There has been an Emerson poll released today that shows them tied in a literal dead heat.
Really? They're tied now?
Yeah. And the current spread here is Kelly +1. So that is well within the margin of error. That is, for all intents and purposes, a tie. And this was, again, just look at the chart. This tells the whole story of this midterms. Kelly cruising through the spring, through the summer, and look at this. Look at how quickly. Look at this. On October 31st, on Halloween, less than a week ago, it was what? 2.5 point spread? Now it's a 1 point spread. So it's been a pretty dramatic move in Masters' direction to the point where this is now looking like a toss-up, and this is why the Republicans are now, according to 538, slight favorites to win the Senate. As you can see here, Republicans 55 and 100, Democrats 45 and 100. That is, for all intents and purposes, a coin toss. But that's why, because now the Republicans have Plan Bs, and everybody's going to need Plan Bs if Republicans win the Senate.
Yeah.
Right. You got me mid-sip, motherfucker.
Well, I just thought of that second. I did not pre-plan that joke. I just thought of that right there.
I almost did a classic spit take.
It was almost nailed him. Damn it. But yeah, this is a Plan B that they have. They have a backup now. This is an insurance policy against losing two out of those three big ones.
Well, Blake Masters is the opposite of Laxalt. In other words, he's not willing to moderate his expression of MAGA beliefs at all. Even on abortion, every candidate, even Herschel Walker sounds like, rape and so. But I've heard him sound pretty reasonable on abortion. Herschel Walker. But Blake Masters, so this emphasizes, this goes back to Keaton's point about candidate quality. And maybe if he had even moderated a little bit among all these candidates, Blake Masters is the one least likely to change his tune even a little bit to appeal to suburban moms or whatever. He's just all the way out there. He's not going to change anything. And maybe that's the difference. Maybe that's why he's not ahead of Kelly, because he's just, this is who I am. And what if that works,
Yeah, I don't know what it is. I'm going to try to get Laura Hodge, who's a friend of the show who lives in Arizona, on Tuesday night as a guest to talk about this. But Arizona, more than any other state, went all in on the MAGA movement, both in the governor's race with
And
Kerry
Kerry
Lake
Lake,
and in the Senate with Blake Masters. They
and I
didn't
wonder
fuck
how
around.
much-
They were ride or die. That's it.
That's
Well,
it. And
I think Lake is going to win.
Right.
But by all accounts, she has a lot more skills than Masters does. So it's
well, she was a TV. She's a TV.
she was a
decades,
TV.
right?
Per,
Fox News.
the first time I saw her, but without really knowing anything about the race, I saw her and I saw Hobbs.
Right.
I said she's going to win.
Yeah.
She's going to win. You just put
Trump's
them next to each
ideal
other.
candidate, right? I mean, this is another TV personality like Oz, Kerry Lake. So I wonder how much the enthusiasm that Kerry Lake and Tulsi Gabbard was recently, she's going around with all these people. She was with Kerry Lake recently and Blake Masters on the same, platform rally. How much?
Well, that's where it's unfortunate. I wish Tulsi were really what we'd like her to be. If she were going around and campaigning with some Republicans who made sense in terms of her priorities, but also were campaigning with Democrats and independents and Green and whoever's anti-war and on her, then I'd say, okay, that's not what she's doing. She's lining herself up to run as the first MAGA communist candidate.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, she's in that camp. And if you've seen her with people like Kerry Lake, it's actually very
like
very
why?
cringy. It's
why?
really,
What
really
are you doing?
cringy because
Why?
she's like, and this is borderline. This really is white nationalist borderline stuff. With the actual border.
Sure, yeah, of course.
Borderline. This is getting really, really troublesome with Tulsi actually encouraging these people to come out with some of their quote unquote scary views. So I wonder how much enthusiasm there is for Kerry Lake, and if that's going to help put Blake Masters perhaps over the top. I mean, none of this stuff might happen, right? I mean, Warnock and Kelly, Masters, what's his name?
It could all go either way.
They could all go either way. Fetterman might win. We don't know that yet. It could still be 50-50 or, maybe, it could stay. We don't know that. But at this point, it looks like even a hardcore approach in Arizona is working. And it may not have worked in other states, but over there, maybe it's the border. I don't know what it is.
Well, that's just what you took the words right out of my mouth. I think they figure Arizona is a base state. It's a base state because a lot of the way the Democrats won Arizona in 2020, and they barely won it. But the inroads they've made in Arizona have been as a result of the old liberals retiring from LA to, Scottsdale, right? I mean, so there's a big shit lib vote in Arizona. Right? I mean this Arizona is a state where the Democrats play to the affluent white moderate suburbanite really worked. I mean that's a state where it really paid off. And so I think the Republican Party figures, well, fuck those people. We're not going to try and win them back. We're going to go to our base. This is a border state. This is a historically red state.
Right.
We're going to drive turnout on our side and make up those 12,000 votes that Biden beat us by. I think that's their strategy there.
This is Goldwater country. They're going all in on that. And you and I, Keaton...
Build that wall.
Yeah, build that wall. Exactly. You and I, Keaton, we thought that there were enough California-type liberals for Arizona to be safe for them, but they're playing a different game there.
Yeah, I mean, look, like I said, we don't want to step on Sunday's show, but I think given that dynamic, that is what is keeping Kelly in the game. And so, that's why this is 50-50.
Otherwise,
because that dynamic is real. But that dynamic is also what's driving the Republican strategy of we're going to the base. We're going to the base. This is a border state. This is our PIO country. We need to turn those people out.
Sure.
And we're going to go all in on doing that. Kerry Lake strikes a lot of people as a fucking whack job.
Yeah.
She drives a certain turnout. And that's what they're counting on to win.
Yeah.
All right. Let's go to New Hampshire. Talk about the opposite kind of state. I can't think of two more opposite states, Arizona and New Hampshire. But one way in which they are similar is that this race has dramatically tightened between incumbent Maggie Hassan and challenger Don Balduke. I'm going to call the Babadook.
This only came on the map very recently. This was not even considered, right? So it's only very recently that then Bolduc, whatever his name is, right, is given a chance, right?
Well, let's just look at this graph here.
Yeah.
That trajectory says
There
it
you
all.
go.
Look at this.
Yeah, there you go.
Look at this. 9-point lead in September.
Yeah.
Look at where you are now. 0.8. Another statistical dead heat right now. This was a race that was
Wow.
not on anybody's radar a month ago. September 26th, September 25th. We're not talking about July here. We're talking about a month ago. Look at how these polls have tightened. This has been probably the most dramatic example of a momentum shift. And it's something that no one really saw coming, but it's here. It's here. And like I said, this is another insurance policy
I think it's
against
really
those
possible.
big three states.
I've listened to Bolduc, and I think it's really possible. So if it's a big wave, and their enthusiasm is all on that side, I think it could really happen. And his opponent is really boring, and Maggie Hassan, right? You're talking about boring, right? She may take the cake among all of these people. So I think Bolduc, and again, unlike Blake Masters, he is presenting himself with his extremist views as somebody like, I'm very reasonable, like I'm a fiscal conservative, and we don't want to give a blank check to Ukraine, et cetera, et cetera. So he sounds, it could happen, which would be like, now we're talking about an extreme scenario.
Yeah, I mean, look, New Hampshire is an odd state. It's a libertarian state. There's no sales tax in New Hampshire, right? I mean, they have a real anti-establishment.
Live free or die.
Live free or die, exactly. Yeah. Donald Trump came very, very, very close in New Hampshire both times.
Yeah.
And so that's a state that in this environment can absolutely flip, and it's looking like 50-50. I mean, I don't know how to call that one. I'm going to have to think about that.
I think it's really going to come down. I said this on the show the other night. Michael Moore, and again, I don't think he's sending those emails every day like he was, because I didn't get one today. I'm almost positive he didn't send one out today. For a while, he was sending them out every day. I think he's getting demoralized. It's very much like 2016. Either Trump's theory that there was a hidden rural infrequent voter vote that would come out for him, or he was wrong. And there was really no in between. There was really no in the middle. If he was right about it, he was going to win. And if he was wrong about it, I thought he would lose pretty badly, 3-5, if he was wrong. It was one or the other. Either Michael Moore is right that there's a hidden abortion vote that's not showing up, or the Democrats are going to get killed. I really think it turns on that question.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Well, it absolutely does turn on that question.
Yeah.
And the reason why it's looking less and less likely that whatever hidden row vote there is, and there certainly is some. Kansas wouldn't have voted by 20 points to maintain abortion access.
So it could happen.
It could happen.
We do have to take into account, like, there could be this shocking political result of all these women, even Republican women, who in polling might be saying they're voting for these Republican candidates, but when they get in the voting booth, might actually be like, you know what?
And Democrats could end up with 51, 52 in the Senate. I mean, that's not beyond the realm of possibility.
It could happen.
We just don't know, which would change the whole dynamic for.
If Roe hadn't happened, this would be but this wouldn't even be worth covering.
Yeah. Right.
It would only be a question of, well, are they going to get a super majority? That's what we'd be talking about.
On the other hand, the longer that Roe is in the past, in the rearview mirror, right? Imagine if the election were a month or two after Roe, then the Democrats keep the Senate. If it was another few months later, I think I don't want to say, obviously, right? The shock is just, people are just building it. It's just building it into their outlook. So it's not the determining. Then they may say, well, what about basically what's happened is that inflation and prices have, cost of living, these considerations have slowly recovered their status as the overriding issues as the last 6 months have gone by, right? But have they completely overridden the Roe concern, or is that still that hidden vote out there? We don't know, and it's still
we don't know. We're not going to know until election night. If overall, if you had a gun to my head, I would say what's going to happen next week is the Republicans are going to win, and the stock market is going to go off the hook into the end of the year. That's what I believe the next 2 months look like. But there is this major X factor because of Roe that it could lead to an unpredictable outcome.
It is an X factor, although, see, the way I see Dobbs was as an opportunity for the Democrats to grab the mic, right? It gave them a chance to seize the narrative.
They didn't do it.
And
Yeah,
they
right.
grabbed the mic
Yeah.
and they
Declined.
they kept hammering on Roe, but
Right.
they had an opportunity there to include reproductive rights as part of a broader program.
Health plan. Right.
Exactly.
They're
Precisely.
still
And they did
saying-
not do any of that
Right.
because the pollsters told them, hey, this is the only issue you got this cycle.
Right.
And you have it by a lot, so hammer this, hammer this, hammer this, and there's a saturation point for that. I mean, all the polling data says far and away economy, jobs, inflation, even immigration, well ahead of Roe.
Right.
And so, yeah, you can get a bounce out of that, especially when it's fresh in people's minds and people are protesting in the streets. Sure, you can get a bounce out of that. But that was your opportunity to get eyeballs back on you. That was an opportunity where everybody thought, oh, wait a minute. Should we empower the GOP this fall or should we not? Let's rethink this. And the Democrats had an opportunity there to incorporate, like I just said, reproductive rights into a broader
message.
message, and they did not do that.
Yeah.
They did not do that. And we're seeing the results of that now because in the fall, everybody is a political actor in the fall. In the summer, that's not true. In the summer, most people are at the beach, and then you had the Democratic base with their hair on fire over Roe.
Right.
Now everybody's tuned in, and the Democrats were not able to seize control of the narrative in the way they would need to insulate themselves from what we're seeing now.
Right.
And
to
so,
to counter Russell about the hidden Roe vote, that hidden Roe voter would say, well, what did the Democrats do in the last 6 months? What did they do? So there's, and what's astonishing to me is when House, Senate, Governor, it doesn't matter who it is, you talk to them and they say, I'm for Roe. Roe is over. It's finished. What's your next plan? Roe's not coming back, right? Why are you still saying Roe? Why?
Also, it's just looking less and less likely,
Right.
despite what the average individual politician would say, right? Despite what each candidate has to say about this issue. If you take a view from 30,000 feet, it's looking less and less likely that there's going to be a national ban. Right.
Abortion
It just
ban
looks
is not-
like they're going to shy away from that, right? That's just the sense you get. You have governors saying, oh, yeah, no, I'm against abortion, but I'm going to honor the law, whatever. Like, they are afraid of this. And I think voters get the sense that, hey, listen, there's not going to be a national ban here.
Sure.
So I'll take my chances.
Exactly.
We can't afford bread.
6 months, right? I got to
and
feed the
that's where
kids
it's
I
coming
already
down.
have, and so
And that's probably true. That's why ultimately my prediction is what it is. And the reason I mention the stock market is because that tends to happen when Republicans win, and it reinforces the idea that they're better for the economy. Because in spite of the fact that, yes, most of the stocks, most of the assets are held by very wealthy people, a lot of people have 401ks too, man. And a lot of
they rope you in.
those people's 401ks have been wiped out over the last year and a half. And as soon as Republicans get in, it's because, the stock market, all of that, it's all psychological. It's because the investor class, when Republicans are in, they know that they're going to get their foot rub. They're going to get their happy ending. And so they'll throw their money into the market, and it lifts everybody's 401ks, and it makes people vote Republican again the next time. So that's why I mention it, because I think, I've never seen the stock market go down like this. I mean, the last time it did, I would have been a child.
No, what about
Well, no, to see it just sustained like this, just go down and down and down. Like, you're looking at the last couple years, you can't catch a break in the market. Like, it's pretty rough, man.
Well, you would know, as an investor class person, Russ, I have no idea about that. I have no money for the stock market, man. I can, I gotta get a good laptop first.
Right.
So,
He has to get a ceiling light first.
I gotta start with a ceiling light. I got a lot of things I have to work on.
No, I grabbed those I bonds, man. That's the place to be right now.
Properties in Buffalo and New Orleans and wherever else. You're just expanding all over the country, right? So
I'm just saying. Look, that same thing happened. If you remember, Maddow did her patented sad eyes the night that Trump won in 2016, talking about the stock market is crashing, and it's just which really tells you who she is. But it dropped for a second, and it didn't even drop. The futures dropped,
Right.
Because the investor class, there's a certain number of people, they're just knee jerk, right? But then once the wheels started turning, the next day when the market actually opened, stocks went off the hook. The futures were down for a minute, and then the market just roared through his entire presidency, and it makes people feel rich. And it also does make businesses more inclined to invest and more inclined to hire. This is another thing. Like, look, when Democrats are in power, a lot of the capitalist class hold back their capital, which further sabotages Democrats.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
Right.
And then when the Republicans come in, they unleash the capital, and it creates this impression that Republicans are good for the economy.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Now, I just want to say one last thing about that, the fear factor in abortion. I think someone like Lee Zeldin, if you look at him, he can say, first of all, they all say it's a states' right issue. So 6 months have gone by, no national abortion ban. They all say it's a states issue, it's a local issue, deal with that. And number two, someone like, in a solidly democratic state can say, well, you know what, it's the legislator. I can't do anything. Even if I wanted to. I mean, I think Lee Zeldin actually says that. Even if
that's what he says. Yeah.
I can't do anything because
that's what he's running on.
You got nothing to worry about. I am going to do the cash bail thing and get the criminals off the streets. Those are things I can do even with the legislator, but you don't have to worry about abortion. So I think that enough time has gone by to alleviate those sorts of concerns. I mean, 6 months have gone by, right? So,
well, now that Hochul brought in Hillary, he's done.
Yeah, right. Yeah, she brought in the ringer.
She brought in the big guns.
It's a death, right? The Hillary's in town. Yeah.
Yeah. As Hillary goes, so goes the country.
Right.
All right, we got 2 more states to cover. These should be pretty quick. We saved the most boring ones for last. What a boring state this is. Wisconsin.
Oh.
Ron Johnson versus Mandela Barnes. As you can see here,
motherfuckers.
Yeah, yeah. As you can see here, a shift in Johnson's favor here. Barnes up by 5 points in August. There hasn't been as much polling out of Wisconsin, so now we get to look back into the summer of Roe. There's a phrase called Roe-vember, right? Because remember Roe in November. It turns out the Roe versus Wade ended up being a summertime thing. Like, that seemed to be animating people.
It was really August.
Yeah, August. Right. Yeah, exactly. There you have it. A switch there. Johnson's been up now for quite a while. He is the incumbent. It's difficult to see how Barnes pulls this out. And so there you have it. Ron Johnson, boring Ron Johnson.
Which is amazing.
Who came in 2016. Right. Didn't he beat Feingold in 2016? Right. That was that race.
So. Yeah.
Yeah. That was part of the Trump wave.
And early in the year, it looked like Mandela Barnes had this thing sewed up and he was progressive and all that. And then then Johnson just ran away with it. And maybe because of the general overall trend, and people thought, well, okay, he's got the right values for the state. And it seems like Wisconsin is really at all levels. It's just the governor is still Democratic, right? But it seems like that state is, since Trump 2016, is trending more and more, right? Isn't it true? Like,
well, the state legislature is dominated by GOPers, and it looks like that governor's race is 50-50 now.
It's
and
just
so,
that's where I wonder, man, because that really is going to be abortion is illegal if you don't put in a Democratic governor. So I wonder, that's actually a state in particular because of the circumstance with the legislature, where I wonder if a hidden women's vote will not elect the Democrat governor.
Yeah. I mean, that's going to be an interesting one to watch for sure. But there's a lot
that
of line
is
there between
one
those
state
two
that's
races.
not really a pro-life state where the state is going to make abortion illegal. If you elect a Republican,
Keaton, what do you think?
I mean, every time the Packers win, there's like 50,000 pregnancies within a 20
they
mile
can't
radius
have
of
that.
Green Bay. So,
they can't have that.
What are you going to do
in this economy?
Yeah,
Come on.
exactly.
They can't afford those kids.
Well, why do you think someone like Mandela Barnes, who was a good candidate, could not, seal the deal? What do you think went wrong?
I'm not sure. I mean, I couldn't really answer that because I don't know what the primary field was there. You know, that was just not something that was really on our radar. So I don't know what the other options were. I do know that in Wisconsin, you know, Wisconsin is a state where a black progressive could win a primary because you have cities like Madison, you know, college towns that are very, very left wing. And then you have Milwaukee, a huge Democratic power base of the city with a very large African American population. So the conditions there are ripe for a progressive black candidate to get the nomination. So that's probably, not that I'm an expert on Wisconsin politics, but knowing what I know, that probably explains why he was able to win that primary.
Right.
I do know there are controversial things in his past. For one, he tweeted out some crazy thing when Steve Scalise was shot that he took one for the team, and they made a big issue out of that. It's a really fucking deranged thing to say, especially if you want to run for office. So, you know, but like I said, I haven't followed this race too closely. But, you know, look, the fact that he's within 3 points means he wasn't a particularly bad candidate because it's a red wave year and Johnson is an incumbent. You know, it's really, really tough to knock off incumbents in this kind of year. And so, you know, I don't know if he's been particularly bad as a candidate. I think he's just fallen victim to the same dynamics that all these other Democrats have. You know, I mean, we've seen that trajectory happen all over the place. Yeah. All right, let's go to Ohio.
Ohio was your last, saving for the last. Yeah, so you're,
Ohio, J.D. Vance versus Tim Ryan. Tulsi Gabbard, the aforementioned Tulsi Gabbard, did endorse J.D. Vance. And this endorsement, I will not hold against her because her rationale
that makes
was...
some kind of sense.
Right, because her rationale was that J.D. Vance is against nuclear war and Tim Ryan seems neutral on the idea of nuclear war. This is a situation. I mean, we covered that debate segment where they had just completely different attitudes towards the threat of nuclear annihilation. Anis, you messaged me that it was just shocking to see Tim Ryan stand on stage like a doofus.
Putin, you know, what if he does nuclear? Well, you know, I mean,
we'll respond for it.
We'll respond really hard. Don't worry about it. We're gonna,
don't worry about it. Right.
Instead of saying, "What are you even talking about? We can't have nuclear war." Which is basically what J.D. Vance said. He said, like, you know, he said one word of the typical political stuff at one sentence, and then he went into, we just can't get into that. That's not even conceivable. We can't even contemplate that. That is, you know, and that was J.D. Vance, right?
Which aligned him with that famous coddler, Barack Obama, coddling Russia by saying that Ukraine is not worth a nuclear war. It will never be mean to us what it does to Russia.
All right, so here's the polls here.
Yeah.
Vance maintained a slight lead the entire time, so this wasn't something where the dynamics totally changed. But as you can see here in recent days, Vance got a little Viagra boost there on his line and now seems to be winning this fairly handily, average of 5 points. But a recent poll here, and this is an Emerson poll, which tends to undercount Republicans like a lot of the mainstream polls have, Vance +9. And so that spells trouble for Tim Ryan, no doubt about that.
Well, it's interesting that throughout October, I remember that
it's Vance +9.
Well, the last poll is Vance +9. The average is Vance +5, but the latest poll is +9.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I remember hearing in October that Tim Ryan still had a chance, and maybe that was Democratic wishful thinking. But after the debate, you know, there have been more talk about Tim Ryan still having a chance, whereas earlier it was like, you know, Vance's. So the poll, you know, the trend line that you showed seemed to contradict some of that impression that's being put out there that Tim Ryan is still...
Well, because the establishment media has its head so far up its ass that it actually thought Tim Ryan made more sense on the nuclear war question than J.D. Vance did. When the reality was the complete opposite. We're the only people in independent media who covered that segment of that debate. All the progressive media coverage were talking about how Tim Ryan owned J.D. Vance on LGBT rights.
Sure.
We're the only ones who say, hey, did you pay attention to the segment before that where they talked about the threat of nuclear Armageddon?
Right.
And Tim Ryan had, I mean, that was one of the most embarrassing moments of any debate I've ever remembered.
Ever.
You know?
That was just
Well, you see, it's like this, folks. We get these things in Washington. They're called bunkers. And you can,
whatever,
if you're a senator, you can avail yourself of one of those bunkers. So maybe we'll start a program where everyone can have a bunker.
Yeah, right. I mean, it was just
ridiculous. All have the same
Right.
protection from nuclear war that senators have.
And look, Vance looked good in that debate. I mean, that was a situation where Vance looked good there. I thought Vance won that debate on points in that segment alone.
Yep.
Didn't even matter what the rest of the debate was.
No, he was
won
very
it on
good
that
throughout.
segment alone.
Throughout
And I
was
thought
very
he
good.
assuaged a lot of the anxieties that a lot of people feel about these sort of more fringe candidates of the Peter Thiel MAGA movement. That's what was holding Vance back a little bit over the summer and early fall, was people are like, oh, I don't know, this guy, he's an author, or he talks about Mexican fentanyl. Like, they thought the guy was a little Meshuggah, right?
Little bots.
Right, right. And I think he had a good debate. And I think people said, you know what? All right, I feel comfortable with this guy now. And I think that explains a lot of the polling bounce he's gotten.
And
my opponent wants to talk about nuclear war, but there's a lot of this misgendering stuff going on in Ohio.
And he kept saying that, his point is like, if you represent Youngstown, what have you done for Youngstown? Which is a killer point, because after that, what can you say? And, I do remember hearing that, Tim Ryan has found a way. He's discovered some secret method to distance himself from Biden, and that's gonna, again, that's the liberal media gushing over him. I'm not sure exactly what points that was about. Do you remember, Keaton? Like,
Ryan, I do understand what you're saying, and Ryan has always had that kind of complicated relationship with the Democratic establishment, because on the one hand, he's very centrist. On the other hand, he's so centrist that he has talked about replacing Nancy Pelosi as speaker. Right. So he can kind of have his cake and eat it too. He embraces them on policy all the way, but culturally, he's been able to sort of distinguish himself from the real Democratic power players, which gave him a chance in this race. I mean, look, I don't think Tim Ryan was the wrong candidate for the Democrats to run. This was a very, very, very difficult race for Democrats to win. They've gotten their asses handed to them in Ohio the last two presidential cycles. It's been trending red the whole way. They figure we could use a guy like Ryan, who's both anti-establishment but also moderate. He fit that. And he made this a single-digit race, which is more than I could say for a lot of other Democrats who they may have put up against Vance. I just don't think in the end it's nearly enough, as the polls are starting to indicate here.
Right. And Ohio seems to be less and less of a bellwether state that it used to be. Right.
No, it's basically a red state. Ohio used to be the bellwether. Now it's a red state.
The ultimate, right? And now
it all came down to Ohio. Yeah. 2004. That was the state. It was the state.
Wisconsin seems to be going that way. And I don't think Pennsylvania is there yet, but perhaps, over the next few cycles, that would be like that's pretty much the whole Midwest, industrial Midwest gone, if that happens. Yeah.
All right, everybody. Well, we had a long day of podcasting. That wraps it for us. We want to thank you guys for watching, and we want to invite you all tomorrow to our 7 p.m. Eastern live stream, where we will give our final predictions for the midterms. And then, obviously, on Tuesday night, starting at 6:30 p.m. Eastern, we will be live all night giving you up-to-the-minute results. Thanks, Anis, for joining us. Great to see you again. We'll see you tomorrow, man.
Great to be on. Thank you.
Please clap.